Good day, gentlemen. Dirk here with the MGTOW solution. I'm coming at you from the North Country, where I'm about to do a little cross-country ski tour. I'll try and shoot some video along the way, but it's pretty cold out, about 6 degrees, so I don't know how the camera's gonna hold up. But like I always tell people, the key to staying in shape during the winter is simple. Don't be a pussy. Anyway, we're gonna be talking about feminism. I'm gonna put this camera on my head and see if that works. If not, we'll just show you some pics. At any rate, I'll talk to you when we get back to the studio. Thanks.
Chapter 2, Feminism. I won't delve too deeply into the history of feminism, as the topic has been thoroughly covered, and you don't need to be an expert anyway. I'll just touch on some key points and then focus on where things stand today. If you want to understand MGTOW, then you must understand modern feminist thinking. The first wave of feminism is generally accepted as the period between the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The focus was on education, legal rights, working conditions, and ending gender double standards. More on double standards later. Perhaps the two most significant events of the first wave were the criminalization of prostitution and women being granted the right to vote in the United States. Second wave feminism ran roughly from the 60s to the 80s. This was the women's liberation movement, where women sought further advances within society. The general idea seemed to be that traditional female roles were unacceptable in the modern age, and that women were truly equal to men in all ways. There was a lot of bra burning and complaining about housework. As we'll see, the reality is that many feminists believed, and continue to believe, that they are not only men's equals, but our superiors. A significant development of the second wave was the advent of reproductive rights in the form of contraception. Birth control pills provided women with a measure of control over when they would bear children, regardless of their sexual behavior. At the same time, women lobbied for and received access to abortions on demand. And of course, no-fault divorce made it easy and profitable for wives to leave their husbands. The early 1990s marked the beginning of the third wave, in which women sought more sexual freedom. This included having multiple partners, lesbianism, and the ability to express sexuality without judgment. We're currently in the fourth wave of feminism. Depending who you talk to, this period began around 2008. The focus has shifted to accepting obesity and transgenderism, as well as fighting against perceived misogyny, or hatred of women. The internet plays a key role here, just like it does in MGTOW. The fact is, feminism has been a continual process of imposing the agenda. There were never any breaks between the waves. It has been relentless, and it probably started at some level long before the first wave. The key takeaway is that feminism is embraced with the same fervor by many women that jihadism is embraced by many Muslims. Chief among the countless feminist complaints is patriarchy, defined by Merriam-Webster as follows, quote, social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line, end quote. The thing is, patriarchy is no longer the way Western society is organized, and it hasn't been since the 50s. Second-wave feminism succeeded in basically destroying it, so what's the problem? The problem is that many women still blame the non-existent patriarchy for their imagined unfair treatment. Not enough female CEOs? Patriarchy. Women aren't cutting it in traditionally male careers? Patriarchy. Male athletes earn more than female athletes? Patriarchy. Feminists don't win elections? Patriarchy. It's a valid excuse for almost everything, but it's not a valid argument. Still, some families do happily choose to operate under a patriarchal arrangement, but most don't. Certainly not families with feminists in the mix. The very concept of patriarchy is so abhorrent to feminists that many refuse to take their husband's surname at marriage, opting instead to keep either their maiden names or to adopt some hyphenated compromise. Even when a man provides the vast majority of the resources and all of the protection and security, he is still not afforded any status, even though he's earned it. An assumption is made that all women are opposed to patriarchy by default, but I suspect this is not the case. Some women, believe it or not, might actually like the idea of being a stay-at-home mom. For them, having a hard-working, capable husband ensuring the family's financial well-being is actually a good thing. Let him go fight traffic, toil in the workplace, deal with difficult bosses, and work his ass off. Was this really such a horrible deal for women? No, it wasn't. It was about division of labor within the family. Now, women are expected to have a career despite the demands of motherhood, while men are expected to take on many of the roles traditionally performed by the woman so that she can do so. This does work in a lot of cases, and is actually considered the new normal. But if a modern woman chooses to focus all of her efforts on taking care of the kids and home, feminists will ridicule her. In this way, feminism has been harmful to many women. They're expected to do it all. If they don't, then they're considered a part of the problem and are setting women back towards the dreaded and terrible patriarchy. Let's look at another social construct, matriarchy, defined by Merriam-Webster as, quote, a family, group, or state governed by a matriarch, a system of social organization in which descent and inheritance are traced through the female line. End quote. A matriarch is defined as, quote, a woman who rules or dominates a family, group, or state. End quote. Would this be a better way to go? The answer, of course, depends on whom you ask. Feminists would immediately respond in the affirmative, given their misperception of women as superior, e.g., if women ran the world, there would be no war. Suggest matriarchy to a MGTOW, and you'll probably be met with laughter. Yet, matriarchy is common, at least at the family level. There might not be many female world leaders, but there are definitely a lot of women in charge at home. This is one of the driving forces behind MGTOW. When a man earns the majority of the money, but the woman insists on having the final say in all purchasing decisions, the man has a choice to make. Either accept it, as most men do, or reject it, which will lead to some serious problems. Women also tend to control men's time and insist on making the important decisions. They decide what the weekend's activities will be, what color the house will be painted, what cars will be purchased, etc. Men allow this, excusing it with the platitude, happy wife, happy life. Guys like this are known as simps, short for simpleton. They're too ignorant to even recognize their own stupidity. No reasonable person would dispute this gynocentric setup, but we're expected to believe that patriarchy is the real problem. Many feminists cite the preponderance of men in politics as evidence. After all, we still haven't had a female president, they argue. Proof of patriarchy, right? When Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 presidential election, feminists saw this as evidence that the system is still rigged against them. During the campaign, anyone who opposed Hillary was immediately branded as a sexist, just as those who opposed Obama were labeled racist. Both were cases of playing the victim card, a common tactic among feminists and social justice warriors. Clinton's defeat resulted in deafening cries of victimhood across the country. It was simply inconceivable to her supporters that she could have lost because, well, she lost. Surely there must be other more sinister forces at work. So what's the solution? Some kind of affirmative action? Should we have different standards for female political candidates so they are better represented? Of course not. Not if we're striving for equality. Let them run the political gauntlet just like men do. Or perhaps the feminists could, field a candidate capable of winning the election? Whether you're talking about patriarchy or matriarchy, it helps to think of it in terms of macro and micro levels. the macro level being society as a whole, with the micro level being the individual family. As a self-proclaimed MGTOW, I don't spend a lot of time trying to change society because I have very little control over it, if any. I choose to focus on the micro level, that is, my own life. I can control that. That doesn't mean I don't care about society. In fact, I've made far more contributions to society than most feminists. Military service, volunteer work, taxes, writing this book, etc. And I know that I can achieve more at my level than I can at the national level. Besides, what action could I take to change society? Lobby politicians? Argue with militant feminists? Appeal to women to be reasonable? All are losing propositions. Instead of beating my head against those walls, I choose to live life the way I want to, and maybe share some of my experiences with other men in the hope of sparing them some trouble. A lot of men are doing this, and I suspect that collectively we may have more impact on society than we think, whether that's our intention or not. Either way, I'm better off by far staying out of the mainstream. Despite all the successes of feminism, women continue to claim that men are oppressing them. The facts, however, do not bear this out. Today's woman has the opportunity to do virtually anything a man can do. It's the law. That doesn't mean she can do it, but the opportunity is there. One recent example of women achieving equality is in the armed forces. In 2016, women were authorized to serve in combat arms positions in the U.S. military, including special forces. Whether or not they excel in that arena remains to be seen, but again, the opportunity is there. There are minimum standards for physical fitness that must be met in order to serve in these important combat roles. The standards are there for a reason, and it's not to keep women out of the ranks, as some have suggested. It's to ensure mission success. If you don't meet the standards, then you don't get to be there, regardless of whether you're female or male. However, there's a problem in the military. Outside of combat arms positions, women are held to much lower physical standards than men, and this has been the case for decades. To illustrate, let's look at the Army Physical Fitness Test. Here are the current minimum standards for 17 to 21-year-old male and female soldiers. For push-ups, men have to do 35, women have to do 13. For sit-ups, men have to do 47, and women also have to do 47. On a 2-mile run, men have 16 minutes and 36 seconds, while women have 19 minutes and 42 seconds. For body fat, men have to be below 20%, women have to be below 30%. What's wrong with this picture? The only place women are equal to men is when performing sit-ups. Why is this? Are women not as capable as men? And why has this situation been allowed to continue for so long despite over a century of continuous feminist activism? Have they quietly conceded that women are physically inferior to men? Of course they haven't. But if you held women to the same standards as men, then women would be underrepresented in the armed forces. And of course, that would be unfair, right? On the one hand, we're supposed to accept that women are as capable as men. On the other hand, we have to cut them some slack so we don't notice that they aren't. Here's an even simpler example. Why is it that men's heads are shaved in boot camp while women are allowed to keep their hair? I was told in basic that they shaved our heads for hygiene reasons and to strip away some individuality in order to develop more of a team mentality. I always understood that. Don't those reasons apply to females? Apparently not. This is another example of gynocentrism. There can be no other logical explanation. This privileged status helps to explain some statistics from the men's rights documentary The Red Pill by Cassie J. 99% of wartime deaths are men. 93% of workplace deaths are men. 80% of suicides are men. Men are sentenced to 63% more prison time than women for the same crime. 81.6% of child custody cases are awarded to women. You could attribute the first two of those stats to the male's willingness to pursue dangerous occupations, including military service. Men tend to step up when required for the safety and advancement of our societies. To validate this, just research the history of the Congressional Medal of Honor. As for the suicide rate, how do we explain that? Testosterone? Or could it be that more men than women find themselves trapped in what they feel to be hopeless situations? Is there a correlation between the suicide rate and the stat cited for prison time and custody battles? Could it be that men, being more likely to have their lives ruined by the opposite sex, are thus more likely to see no other way out? These are troubling statistics, and clearly men and women are not the same, certainly not equal, when you consider those stats. Still, feminists continue to argue that women are at least men's equals. No, men and women are different if you apply even a modicum of common sense. It should be obvious that men generally have higher physical work capacities than women do. Yet feminists will deny this and point to the rare exception to the rule. But that doesn't change reality. Just hold a pull-up contest if you have any doubts. If women truly are men's equals in the physical domain, let them prove it rather than simply state it as though it were a fact. The fact is that while women have achieved equal rights with men in those areas where it's to their benefit, they've conveniently avoided equality in those areas where it would be inconvenient. They've achieved equal rights while avoiding equal responsibilities. The physical fitness double standard is just one example. Perhaps the most glaring one is selective service, where men alone are required to register for the draft. We don't see anyone lobbying for equality on that particular issue, and certainly not feminists. Why not? Shouldn't they also have the right to be drafted? Women should be outraged. The implication is that they are incapable of serving in the military, and of course, we've already seen that they are, so long as we hold them to lower physical standards. It's either that, or they are simply more valuable than men, in which case they're not arguing for equality, but for superiority. And then there's divorce. Who usually gets the short end of the stick in that scenario? Without question, men. Everybody knows this, and it's accepted as just the way things are. But why is it assumed the children will go with the female while the male pays her bills? Why does she have the right to continue living at the standard to which she has become accustomed, while the man is expected to get by in a tiny, crappy apartment to which he is unaccustomed? It's because feminism isn't about equality. The disparity explains why women are generally much more eager to get married than men are. It only makes sense. They're getting a better deal, and it's the same in the dating world. Men must treat women as equals, but are expected to pick up the check on the first date and every date thereafter. How would the average woman react if the man suggested splitting the dinner check on a first date? It wouldn't go well. Why is that? In this scenario, the man would be considered a loser. He would never get a second date with that woman. Why? After all, he was simply treating her as his equal, just like he's supposed to. Their answer is usually something along the lines of, well, of course I want equal rights, but I also want chivalry. Well, guess what, gold digger? You can't have it both ways. After all, chivalry is the act of treating women as special. Stating that one wants to be both equal and special simply confirms that many women believe they're in fact better than men, and therefore entitled to special treatment. So they insist on a different set of rules. And they have them. You see examples in the media as well. If there's a news report on some kind of disaster that resulted in fatalities, you might hear something like, 24 people were killed, including women and children. The implication is that if all of the victims were men, it would be less of a disaster. I would agree that children being killed is more tragic than men being killed, but is the death of a woman a bigger loss than the death of a man? It shouldn't be, if we're equals. In the entertainment world, we see men portrayed as incompetent buffoons who would fail completely in life if it weren't for their smart, capable wives. This probably started with Homer Simpson, but has become a successful formula for countless bad sitcoms. The men are overweight, not very bright, and basically lazy slobs. The women, by contrast, are attractive, confident, and capable of picking up the man's slack. This may pass for entertainment in today's idiocracy, but it also reinforces the idea that women are more competent human beings. And so today we have a situation where women have all of the opportunities that men do, but when they fail to excel, they still blame men. After all, it couldn't possibly be their fault. It must be the glass ceiling. If you point any of this out, you'll be labeled as a sexist, or possibly accused of hate speech. Gynocentrism even permeates the most mundane aspects of life, such as toilet seat etiquette. Virtually all men have been chastised for leaving the toilet seat up, a perceived grievous breach of protocol that irritates women to no end. But why is down the supposed default position? Because it makes women's lives slightly easier. It also serves as a subtle reminder that her needs must always come first. Want to have some fun testing this theory? Next time you're at a social gathering, when you come out of the restroom, feign irritation and ask the group, "Who left the toilet seat down?" Glare at the women accusingly and see what happens. You'll soon have every woman in the room correcting you, hopefully while seeing the humor in your point, though don't count on it. More troubling, you'll probably have some men taking their side. You have to go along to get along. Simps. Let's take a closer look at gender roles at home. For decades, we've been told that doing housework like cooking, cleaning, and laundry is somehow demeaning, and so men should share in those responsibilities. But there's another point that nobody seems to ever talk about. It's automatically assumed that when the roof leaks, the car breaks down, and the grass needs mowing, the man will take care of it. He'll paint the house, build fences, and fix anything that breaks. Then, when he comes out of the heat after, say, scooping up all of the dog shit and pulling the weeds, there'll still be dirty dishes in the sink because domestic chores should be shared. Somehow, that principle doesn't apply when we're talking about digging a septic system or even taking the trash to the curb. Would it fly if a man suggested that she go change the oil in the car while he puts the laundry in the washer and pushes the button? Or if he expected her to move the big pile of rocks while he vacuums the living room? His very manhood would be questioned. This is an example of using gender roles when it's convenient and disparaging them when it's not. Cooking dinner? You can do that just as well as I can. Roof leaking? You expect a girl to go fix it? What are you, some kind of pussy? Women will demand that you do your share when it comes to washing dishes, but fall silent when it's time to chop firewood or shovel snow. In a perfect world, we would have some kind of sensible sharing of chores within a given household. That was kind of the idea behind the old model. Everybody does what they're best at, and everyone pulls their fair share of the load for the benefit of the family. But we don't live in a perfect world. In my experience, housework isn't a big deal unless you live with a slob. Since I'm single, I don't spend much time on maintenance, cleaning, and all the domestic stuff that needs to get done. This is partly because I don't live in an enormous house, and partly because once I clean things up, they tend to stay clean. I have no problem doing my own dishes, laundry, and cooking. I honestly don't know why women have such a hard time with it, given all the modern tools that have been provided for them. Provided, I might add, by men. It's taken quite a while for men to wake up to this reality and decide to take action. Why did we tolerate it in the first place? Mostly because men have a strong desire for sex and are willing to put up with a lot to satisfy that need. However, we seem to have reached a tipping point, which is summed up perfectly by one woman's comment during a recent divorce proceeding. "I guess I just pushed too far." Well, yeah, people have limits. We're at a point now where men are simply realizing it's not worth it. The marriage rate is plummeting, divorce rates are up, and we're starting to hear some blowback. Women are complaining and asking, "Why can't I find a guy to marry me?" It's because you're not worth the trouble, and men are no longer willing to put up with your bullshit in order to gain access to your vagina. It simply costs too much. Women have, in effect, priced themselves out of the market. They expect men to provide everything that they could possibly want, and in return the man gets, what? Sex? Maybe? For a while? When she decides? Not a good return on investment. Most men would probably agree they'd prefer a woman who takes care of her health, isn't obese, and isn't looking for a free ride. Maybe she should also be nice. Sounds reasonable. But those women are so rare now that in MGTOW circles they've come to be known as unicorns. So, instead of searching in vain for a non-existent unicorn, we've opted to get on with our lives and focus on more productive activities. This usually happens after a guy gets raked over the coals during a breakup. Most of us have at least a bit of experience in relationships, if not marriage. Some of us have a lot of it. When things turn bad, as they usually do, the man will pay, and continue to pay. It's common for the embittered woman to seek to take him for everything he's got, and she'll usually succeed. Her girlfriends will encourage her in this. It doesn't even matter if the woman was the cause of the breakup. She can still play the victim card and will almost always come out ahead because the laws are stacked in her favor. This situation is the result of feminism run amok. Now, after decades of this, men have come up with a very simple solution. Don't play the game. We've realized that it's just too risky, and so have moved on with a different outlook that doesn't include sticking our necks out for the privilege of being with women who don't appreciate us in the least. Today, if you search for MGTOW on YouTube, you'll find hundreds, maybe thousands of videos on the topic. Most are simply men sharing their experiences. Some illustrate the flawed logic or emotional instability of women. Others point out society's bias in favor of women. But underneath it all, you'll find a positive message as well as a sense of humor. After all, when a woman punches a man in the face repeatedly and then screams, "What are you gonna do? Hit a girl?" it helps to see the humor in it. These days, when the topic of relationships come up and it becomes known that I'm not married, the conversation can get interesting. For some reason, people always want to know why a person is single. When asked, I usually reply with something like, "My standards are too high. I won't date anyone unless they can walk a mile without being sore for 4 days." This is because I like active people and don't have much in common with sedentary types. Where I currently live, most women couldn't walk a mile if they had to. Those that can are already taken because women who are not lazy are rare and valuable. Unicorns. Occasionally, when discussing women, someone will state that I sound bitter. So I have to explain that there's a difference between being bitter and being realistic. I live in the real world now, and after 35 plus years of experience with women, I can provide hundreds of examples of women manipulating, cheating, lying, etc. I don't have some kind of character flaw that makes me inappropriately bitter. I just have a good measure of caution born of experience. How many times are you supposed to put your hand on the stove, get burned, and keep going back for more? You could say that I'm jaded, but I wasn't born that way, and I didn't just wake up that way one day for no reason. I don't suffer from some kind of innate personality defect. The way I see it, I'm simply paying more attention to my survival instincts than I used to. So yeah, it's true, I don't trust women. They haven't earned it. My current philosophy grew out of decades of interactions with women, and they continue to prove my point to this day, that they utterly fail any form of cost-benefit analysis. This is especially true if you're talking about subjecting yourself to legal action and severe financial penalties, as is the case in marriage. What better way to prove your love and devotion to a woman than by saying, I love you so much, I'm willing to risk legal action and financial devastation to be with you. This is exactly where women want you, vulnerable. They refer to it as commitment. Marriage is about trust, they say, the implication being that if you don't participate, then you're incapable of trusting anyone. There's something wrong with you. Marriage is clearly a risky proposition for men, but what kind of risk do women face? Virtually none. Worst case scenario is she ends up divorced, but even then she'll be better off than when she started, often far better off. She has a guaranteed exit strategy backed up by the courts and the state. We're told that there's supposed to be some shared sacrifice in relationships, and feminists will point out that women often sacrifice their careers in order to have children. Really? Having your maternal instincts satisfied through the efforts of a man is a sacrifice? Not going to work every day so you can be a mommy is a sacrifice? Are we supposed to believe that this is a selfless act? When in fact, all parental rights are virtually guaranteed to her, while the responsibilities land with the man. That doesn't pass the common sense test. It's just a way of putting things into terms that sound acceptable. Shared sacrifice usually means that you, as the man, must sacrifice. The good news is that you don't have to participate in any of this, and it's perfectly okay to live life outside of society's norms, despite what people may say. Think about it. Those norms include serving women's needs to the point of being owned. Been there, done that. No thanks. I put a lot of effort into making relationships work, and all it ever got me was a ton of debt and emotional turmoil. Things are definitely getting better for men as more and more of us realize we have options. The word is getting out, and it's great to see the younger guys avoiding the mistakes many of us old guys have made. There's a lot of activity online, including a lot of debate, but I think there are two key pieces of advice that we can all agree on. 1. Don't get married. 2. Don't cohabitate with a woman. In other words, remain single. Everything else is up to you. You don't have to take a vow of celibacy. You don't have to struggle in vain to change the system. You don't have to avoid all interactions with women. Then again, you can do those things if you want to. It's your decision how you live. People may question it, and even some MGTOW may imply that you're not doing it right, but it's entirely your call, your way. This will minimize the negative impact of feminism in your life, at least in your personal life. Use the MGTOW resources available to you. Learn from others. Then you'll be better prepared when you do find yourself dealing with difficult women. More importantly, you'll know how to avoid being in that situation in the first place. And that's the end of Chapter 2 on feminism. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. And hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see future episodes. And speaking of that, give all MGTOW videos a thumbs up. That'll help our community to grow and help get the word out to guys who haven't got it yet. So until next time, this is Dirk saying have a great day.